Yeah.
Thanks.
So Saul is one of our students who lives in Boston, and Saul is also a regular participant in our daily morning minion and has been for a couple of years now, at least. And so Saul recently went on a trip with a rabbinic colleague of mine, several members of his congregation to Portugal and learned some very interesting things about Jewish history and anti-Semitism in Portugal. So I asked Saul to share a brief kind of overview of what he learned. So we're going to start with Saul. Go ahead, Saul.
Thank you, Rabbi. The history of anti-Semitism in Portugal is marked by several distinct periods, from medieval coexistence to brutal persecution, followed by relative absence and recent resurgence. Now, we've learned in this class that the Muslims ruled in Portugal from about the 8th century to about mid-1249, and then the Christians ruled from that point to the present, or close to the present. Now, I wasn't quite sure what to make of the Jewish heritage journey to Portugal before we visited. Like so many other journeys in this world, my impression prior was not like my impression during and after. When I was younger, I learned about the Spanish Inquisition over and over, though never knew about the Portuguese Golden Age for Jews from the 13th to the late 15th century, or the Portuguese Inquisition, which started in 1496 and established in 1536, where Jews had to leave, convert, or were often brutally murdered. This was led in part by the Queen of Portugal, who was from Spain, Queen Isabel. While we are currently studying anti-Semitism, World War II, Germany, and Europe, which we all understand to be horrific, Portugal was a neutral nation during World War II. While in country, I was often surprised to see minimal Jewish presence today. Don't get me wrong, there were several historical sites and thriving synagogues, though we went to some places where we had to really wonder if it was actually a Jewish historical site or not. The Jewish population across Portugal is rather small, 50,000 in total, 41 just in the town of Belmont, where we spent a total of 2 days. Though there seems to be this great feeling that while the aging Jewish population may be decreasing, more Jews are moving to Portugal now, and there is great hope that there will be much larger Jewish communities in the years to come. We learned that there was relatively minimal anti-Semitism in Portugal in the 20th and 21st centuries. It wasn't until October 7th that it gave rise to those who were waiting to spray paint or desecrate buildings. My overall sense is that Portugal today and for the near future is a safe and growing community for Jewish people to practice their religion with minimal anti-Semitism. I am hopeful that many, if not all, these communities will continue to thrive and grow. Personally, I know that our family will be back, as my brother and his family have recently settled there. Obrigado.
Thank you, Saul. That was really interesting. Very well done. Thank you so much. So that's a special bonus that we got from one of our students. Wonderful contributions based on his experience. I'm glad we had the opportunity to learn from Saul. So all right, we are going to now hear from our fellow students who are going to present about the background readings for Unit 6. So David Weiss-Horowitz, I want to invite you to come on up and give us the summary of Prager and Chalushkin's chapter on Nazi anti-Semitism.
Evening. The authors argued that although Nazism was and is racist, Nazi anti-Semitism was not an outgrowth of racist ideology. Their belief is that to define Nazi anti-Semitism as racist is to de-Judaize Jew hatred. They questioned the view of Nazi anti-Semitism as racist from at least two perspectives. First, that the Nazi label of Jews as a race was not a necessity, since there was already 1,000-year plus history of anti-Semitism. And secondly, There were other races, including Roma, who were also murdered, but were not tied to the Nazi worldview and not the focus of genocide. Finally, how does one use race as an issue given the Nazi friendship and partnership with the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem and other Arab Semitic leaders? It was not because of racism that the Nazis hated Jews, but rather because of their hatred of Jews that the Nazis utilized racist arguments. Hatred of Jews was the primary focus. Hitler wrote and believed that once a Jew, always a Jew. The Nazis believed that Jews used various instruments such as Christianity, Marxism, socialism, capitalism, and democracy to dominate and control the non-Jewish world. Hitler believed and proudly suggested that Jews had characteristics that no attempts to hide, abandon, or assimilate which truly eliminate the Jewish characteristic. A solution of the Jewish problem through conversion or assimilation would not eliminate the problem. The authors note that Hitler used the race issue as a means for progressing his and Nazi anti-Semitism. The authors quickly set the record straight on the other typical thesis on Nazi anti-Semitism, the Jew as the scapegoat. The Nazis did not attack the Jews to achieve power. Rather, they wanted power to attack the Jews. Lucy Davidowitz also has written in support of this position. For Hitler and the Nazis, the implementation of the Holocaust was more important than the military, strategic, operational, and tactical components of World War II. Similarly, the Nazi industrial effort in World War II was secondary to the elimination of Jews. The use of Jews as industrial workers, whether at the IG Farben Bune plant outside Auschwitz or underground assembling the V-2 rockets, was just another means of killing Jews. The scapegoat theory also is refuted by the drive in the early years of the Third Reich to push Jews out of the country. The Nazi ideology was born from years of anti-Semitism in German philosophy. We reviewed Heinrich von Treisch's work and others like him last week, so I won't replicate his thinking and what the author said about it. In summary, the German nationalist anti-Semites argued that German Jews failed to fulfill their part of the bargain implicit in the emancipation that in return for citizenship, they cease being distinct people. In parallel to this anti-Semitic philosophy was the dramatic growth of nationalist sentiment in Germany, of the German Aryan superiority. With a history of Christian nationalist universalist enlightenment or racial anti-Semitism, the Nazi development of the final solution was not an aberration, but a logical outcome of Jew hatred. Unfortunately, the Nazis were not alone in their anti-Semitism. The authors describe the horrendous result of pan-European anti-Semitism, providing specific examples of how several of the 21 countries either contributed to or resisted the slaughtering of 6 million Jews. Where there was a significant local anti-Semitism or strong support for Nazi political aims, destruction of the local population was nearly complete. This included countries such as Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and Holland, where a roundup of Jews was made easier by the self-identification and location of all Dutch Jews, as well as the strength of the Dutch equivalent of the Nazi Party. They were the only legal party once the Nazis occupied Holland in 1940. Where there was a significant local resistance to the Nazis, such as in Denmark or Finland, No Jews were sent to Nazi extermination camps. In Bulgaria, the Nazis faced resistance from local leadership of their deportation of native Bulgarian Jews, so that almost 80% of Bulgarian Jews survived the Holocaust. The authors described the level of Polish and Soviet support for Nazi actions against Jews. Similarly, they described the actions of local Lithuanians, Ukrainians, Croatians, and Romanians in Eastern Europe, as well as the French Peronist government led by Pierre Laval to support the Nazi final solution. The authors conclude, virtually every secular and religious ideology and nationality in Europe had been saturated with Jew hatred by the time the Nazis developed the final solution. Over the preceding decades and centuries, major elements of Christianity, Marxism, and socialism, nationalism, and Enlightenment and post-Enlightenment thought had come to view the existence of Jews as a distinctive people with a distinctive Jewish identity as intolerable. In the final analysis, they all would have opposed what Hitler did, but without them, Hitler could not have done it.
Thank you, David. Very well done. Thank you. Oh, okay. No, you can just leave it with me. Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. And then Ellen, you're up to present the Lucy Davidovitz, isn't it?
No.
Which one is it? Oh, the Levy, right, the Richard Levy. Okay.
When you came. Hi, everybody. Good evening. Good evening. This is a little complicated, I thought, and I reread it because I couldn't believe that this benign introduction of Hitler was something that I was ever exposed to. And what Levy did was do a lot of quotes of Hitler's writings, and then he segues into a lot of history of what is going on in the rest of the international and local countries. So we're getting some points of view, but not too much comment from Levy on what Hitler actually writes about. So Hitler was born in 1889 and died in 1945 at the age of 56. So what do we know? Levy introduces the reader to Hitler, and he appears to be a naive rube who arrives from Linz to Vienna, and clearly he's dazzled by the big, beautiful city of Vienna, the culture, the arts, the theater, movies, architecture, and so on. And he also mentions that there are about 200,000 people living in Vienna, and 10% are Jews. Several times Hitler mentions that he has a lot of inner turmoil because he's a rational person. He grew up in a liberal house that his father created. There was no mention of a mother. And the words of reason clearly is something that is prevailed in his mind. And he doesn't have any negative opinion, according to himself, Hitler, about Jews. The next thing he does say is he looks at Jews as a alien religion. As his life goes on. We don't know anything about his education other than he went to high school, but he seems to be a voracious reader of leaflets, brochures, newspapers. He reads everything that he can. Heavily influenced by some of the people that we discussed last week, like Marr and Fritsch and Wagner. The hostile environment in Vienna is growing. The next segment where Hitler, according to his writings, evolves with the start of writing Mein Kampf, and then starts crossing over and seems to favor reason and discards sentiment. He finally calls himself a fanatical anti-Semite. He attributes the Christian Social Party as his most important transformation. Cleverly, he starts speaking to various crowds of people, and he's very adept at zeroing in and modeling his ranting and raving to the group of people he's speaking to. Personally, I think he has delusions of grandeur, and he starts seeing himself as the savior of the German people. Ultimately, he's the savior of all the world's people. Only Hitler can bring Germany back to the grandeur it deserves in his mind. Only if he gets rid of all the Jews. He is doing the world a great deed by eliminating the centuries of old problems of anti-Semitism that has never come to any positive resolve. The final solution is born 2 years prior to it being enacted. He wanted to methodically frame his logic to prepare the Germans for what was coming. And he does talk a lot about intentions, and he frames his talks or his rantings with a lot of intentions that should not be a surprise for anybody. That he's bringing along. And 1 second. At this point in his career, he has now become a prophet as he sees himself. His personal role is the extermination plans. Centuries of Jew hatred formed his consciousness, but it was his own peculiar psyche that translated the politics and literature of anti-Semitism into systematic murder. The seeds of war are sprouting. Power struggles and economic conflict concurrently is going on while he's doing his ranting and raving. I've eliminated all of the horrible words that he talks about. Allies were formed. Sometimes they changed until 1850. We know England was the uncontested world power. Thereafter, it was a race between Germany and Russia, who wanted to have world domination after the bad outcome of World War I. The Jews are always blamed, guilty of the World War I loss. The Jews benefit from wars, and various other tropes are thrown around all the time and constantly repeated. Might is right. Jews create chaos, tropes galore. Jews are the enemy of mankind. Jews are capitalists. Jews are pacifists. Jews are the proletariat or communists. Follow Marx. And Hitler keeps whipping the crowds into frenzies. The Jew is the common enemy. And January 30th, 1939 is his famous 2.5-hour ranting to 885 Nazi Reichsstadt deputies that was broadcast over the radio to millions and loudspeakers in public places. This was the start of the global national event. The crowds are primed for more. They're bloodthirsty. They believe that they are the victims. Finally, Hitler brings up the Jewish question with a blunt prophecy. The annihilation of world Jewry cannot be changed. No Jew can ever be a German. Logic and reason dictates my mission to give you the freedom from the eternal enemy. Oh, I'm sorry for the.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
It was like.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ellen. David, thank you so much. That was very well done, very thorough and well researched. I just want to remind us, please, that the ask in summarizing our readings is one paragraph. So thank you both. And going forward, we'll do that. All right. So I want to turn now to our text in Unit 6. If you would please pull out from your binder the text that says the law of blood. All right. The author of this book is Johann Chapoutot. He is a modern historian. He is not a Nazi. He's a French historian of Nazi Germany. This book is a really fascinating work. What he does in this book is based on his extensive reading of the immense archives of Nazi papers, writings, etc. Chapoutot describes the Nazi worldview. In other words, his goal in this book is to explain to the reader how the Nazis saw themselves and understood what they were doing and understood the world through their eyes as they articulated in their own words. So he quotes extensively from primary sources and then helps weave it together so that we can understand it. So this is why we're going to be reading from him today. And I want to, so last week we read Hitler's writings, and one of the comments that came up was based on what we saw in Hitler's writings, obviously awful and horrific, anti-Semitism, but the question came is like, how did it go from what Hitler writes in his book to the Holocaust? Here in this chapter that we're going to read, I think we will get a fuller picture of Nazi ideology. Of course, inspired, driven so much by Hitler, but not only by him, so that we can see how it eventuates in the Holocaust. So I want to start in the middle of the chapter. Actually, if you would turn to page 81. Turn to page 81. We're going to read the second half first and then go back to the first half. It just makes better sense to me, anyway, in terms of how I want to examine this. We're going to start at the bottom of page 81, under the header, Racial Insurrection, Universalism, and Liberalism. The French Revolution had put an end to the Middle Ages, much to the chagrin of Roland Freisler, a legal scholar, fond of old-fashioned turns of phrase, as well as sayings in Althochdeutsch, Old High German. According to Freisler, who was a leading jurist in Nazi Germany, the Middle Ages had, despite growing alienation, managed to preserve something of the old ethical and legal spirit of the ancient Germanic race, until the French Revolution had come and swept it all away. The corporatist and therefore organicist legal order of the medieval era had been characterized by a very, quote, a very sound natural character, one that had placed skills at the service of the community in the context of guilds and brotherhoods, with its indentures, its entrepreneurial liberty, its freedom to employ and to employ oneself, bearing witness to the, quote, anarchist and destructive tendencies that were a defining feature of the abstract, individualist liberal law of the 19th century, with its political and legal atomization. There was every reason to deplore the long, quote, dissolution of the Middle Ages that the French Revolution had set in motion. Okay, so I just want to start by understanding this frame here and the role that the French Revolution plays in the Nazi worldview. Okay, so we learned, you know, when back we were studying the Age of Enlightenment, that Enlightenment, the principles of Enlightenment were liberty, fraternity, and equality, right? And the French Revolution came about to overturn the existing order of monarchy and rigidly hierarchical societies based on class distinctions and inherited privilege and different rights for different groups, etc., and replace it with a universalist order where every human being is equal before the law. And we saw this manifest in the discussion in the French National Assembly about the Jews, where the Count Clermont-Tonnerre says famously, to the Jews as a people, nothing. To the Jews as individuals, everything, right? So the French Revolution abolished class distinctions and, or sought to anyway, to abolish class distinctions and religious distinctions and any kind of inherited distinctions that made people unequal or treated differently by the state, and instead have everyone treated equally before the law. Well, you see here in this first paragraph that Nazism abhorred the French Revolution. It abhorred the French Revolution for several reasons. One, which is discussed here, is that the Middle Ages, or the era of human, you know, existence in Europe prior to the French Revolution, was an age of traditionalism and old values that they saw dating back to you know, to ancient Germanic times. And the French Revolution wipes all of that away. But secondly, and this is a key thing that we're going to explore in this reading today, is that the Nazis see the new world order ushered in by the French Revolution as unnatural. Okay? That social hierarchies and all of that that's manifest through that kind of political order reflects the natural world, the way the world is at its essence and how it's supposed to be. Obliterating all of these distinctions and difference is unnatural in the eyes of Nazism. Okay, so we just have to understand that frame, and we'll see how this plays out. Okay, so continuing. Frederick Jess, a doctor and teacher of racial theory at the NSDAP Hochschule, NSDAP is the Nazi party, also heaped criticism on the French Revolution. To his mind, it had been a political and cultural cataclysm that had created an anti-natural order at the heart of Europe. Luckily, Jess continued, the, quote, National Socialist Revolution was there to vanquish the revolution of 1789, which had applied Rousseau as rigorously as the Reich was accused of implementing the theories of Mendel. Rousseau had been the hero of the French Revolution because he had proclaimed universal human equality and exalted mediocre and failed humans who had been endowed with inalienable dignity according to natural law. The French Revolution, like all revolutions, had been the insurrection of the weak and the miscegenated against a Germanic racial aristocracy. Consequently, an Aryan elite had been massacred by the Parisian plebes. Yes, described the hysterical and evil joy of the racial rabble when a blonde head fell at the chopping block of the executioner. He wrote of how to put an end to a veritable racial genocide whose aim was quite simply the extinction of the Frankish and therefore Germanic aristocracy. Quote, the white Charlotte Corday, beautiful as an angel with her blue eyes, had planted her dagger in the heart of the Sardinian Jew Marat, thus becoming a martyr of her blood. A terrifying era indeed, during which Neues Volk reminded its readers, blonde hair and blue eyes were enough to send you to the guillotine because they made you an aristocrat, a member of the Frankish elite, whose extermination the fanaticized masses demanded. The revolution and the terror had provoked the final, quote, de-Nordification of France, which from then on was at the mercy of Negroes and Jews. The SS even had images to support these texts. Slide series number 10 in the, quote, Jewish file created by the RUSHA, Rasse und whatever, of the SS. Frank could tell us, but the SS Central Office on Race and Colonization presented terrifying pictures of the three major massacres perpetrated by the Jews against Nordic humanity. The Purim pogrom against the original Persians who had come from the north, the Russian Revolution of 1917, and 1793 when the Jews had unleashed, quote, a war of extermination against the bearers of Germanic blood. The French Revolution, that, quote, infection from the West, was the stench rising from the swamp of blood of the racial plebes, frustrated and humiliated by their own mediocrity and awakened by the, quote, principle of equality that had, quote, excited the unsatisfied popular classes who were, quote, scorned and socially oppressed. This revolution had in fact been a counter-revolution. The true revolution of modern times was the pacific and liberal insurrection of the Germanic mind in favor of freedom of thought. It had been led by, quote, heroes of our people and of our blood, notably the blonde Galileo, with his eyes as blue as those of the lovely Charlotte Corday. From Kepler to Kant, these heroes had fought against obscurantism of all varieties to, quote, reveal the truth of the laws of nature and the cosmos. Against this intelligent revolution, though, a new obscurantism had prevailed, and the, quote, bioracial consequences of the dogma of universal equality, warned Neues Volk, were nothing short of dramatic. All right, so we're going to pause here. I just want to spend a little time now unpacking some of this and thinking about the opposition between the French Revolution and the, quote, natural order that is at the heart of Nazism. All right, so I think the analogy that best, to my mind, explains what I learned from this book, which is a long book and it's fascinating, is that Nazism is conceiving of the human the human race, as it were, human beings, as part of a continuum of life in the world, of the continuum with animals and plants and such, and that races of humans are kind of like species of animals. And in the natural world, you see, of course, that certain species of animals are inherently stronger than others, and the natural, you know, kind of hierarchy in the animal world is what we call the food chain. Is that there are some at the top, there are some that eat the ones at the bottom, and that's how we call that nature. That's how it's supposed to work, right? Well, the Nazis are seeing human beings in the same way. So that there are certain categories of humans that are stronger and higher on the chain than others. And that's how it's supposed to be. Of course, the Germanic race is at the top in their eyes. And they are supposed to dominate others, just like the lion is the king of the jungle. The Germanics are supposed to be the kings of the world. The French Revolution comes along and says, blows all of that out of the water, and says, it's as though saying, lions and pigeons are exactly the same. Now they're all equal. Now the lion doesn't get to rule the jungle anymore because lions and pigeons are exactly the same. So they see the French Revolution as a perversion of the natural order. We're going to get, of course, to the place of Jews in this whole schematic. But I want to invite any thoughts on this. Michael.
So part of the natural order is that some races are higher.
Right.
And some are lower.
Correct.
And that Talushkin and what's his name say is not racism. Okay. I got it.
Yeah, no, it is racism. It is racism,
You know,
for sure.
they say that that their point of view is that the Nazis weren't racist.
No. I think you're misunderstanding what they said. They're saying that racism isn't the main explanation for the Nazis' attitude toward Jews. And we're going to see that when we read the specific kind of perspective on Jews, because their attitudes towards Jews is not only as an inferior race, it's something different. Okay, so let's suspend our judgment of Prager and Talushkin until we read that. Then I think you'll see what they mean when they're saying it. Frank.
Before we read this topic, Marat was not Jewish.
Oh,
I noticed in the readings,
okay.
the first was Jewish. Well, you know, they
Yeah.
go on and on. Lord Northcliffe belonged to the newspapers in London, Jewish. None of them are Jewish.
Yeah, right. So they just, yeah, they make it up. I mean, of course, like they consider like Romans and Greeks and all this to be Germanic. That's in the Nazis claim that. And then also characterizing others who are not Jewish as Jews, because again, Jewishness for them is it's racial, but it's also more than that. It's a metaphysical category. And so we're going to see that. And that's what makes Jews different from other races in this Nazi schematic. So we have to understand that. And we will as we read on. Yeah, Arlene.
The Nazi philosophy about, say, Italians who were living in Germany. Were they subhuman the way the Jews were, or they were okay?
Not subhuman. So I think there's you know, Italians are not, I don't know how they fit as they're Germanic, I don't think so. I don't think so.
Italians, but other persons.
But here we're talking about, in this worldview, we're talking about race as an immutable category, right? So there's a difference between German and Germanic. And the operative category here is Germanic. Now, the Nazis use the term German and probably Germanic interchangeably, but in our world, of course, you would say, who's a German? A German would be a citizen of Germany, but Germanic is different. That's an ethnic category, and a person can change their citizenship, but they cannot change their ethnicity. Ethnicity is an immutable characteristic, right? Certainly in the Nazi worldview, it's an immutable characteristic, and what Hitler and the Nazis are interested in is the immutable essence of a person, wherever they live, whether they live, you know, whether they have citizenship or not, is not important. What's important is the essential nature of the person. Is that Lynn? Yeah, in the back, yeah.
I'm just really struck reading this and how similar it is to listening to somebody like Jordan Peterson railing against postmodern neo-Marxism, or people railing against like Michel Foucault, and all of these people who rail against this idea that with modernity or postmodernism you get fogginess and an obscuring of these natural, biologically based metaphysical truths of hierarchy.
Yeah.
Right?
Definitely.
It just it doesn't go away.
Right. So this is I think at the heart of the critique of the French Revolution, with its condemnation of the ideas overturning the national order, is the abstraction of concrete things to something that's just amorphous. And it's the concept of alienation, like the alienation from the real. Okay, and we started to see this in Wagner, when he was talking about culture and the Jews. There's Germanic culture, there's this as Germans, our expression of Germanness through the arts and so forth it's like a visceral kind of expression rooted in our being connected to the land and the soil and all of this very tangible stuff. And the Jews have no culture because they're rooted nowhere. They're rootless. The Ahasuerus, the wandering Jew, has no natural home. He's an alien on the planet. He's an abstraction of humanity. There's nothing solid or real about it. And this is super important to what we're seeing in Nazism, is that this is the role that the Jew plays, like this metaphysical category of non-humanness. Because to be human in their view is to be physically, romantically rooted in land and blood and all of this stuff, okay? So when we get to, this is just all context to understand the first part of the chapter, which talks about Jews. Okay, Phil.
I have a question. They're reading all of these papers about anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
At the time that these papers were written, was there any papers written making exception to what these positions were? Or not?
Yeah, I'm sure there are. I mean, were there opponents to Nazism and so forth? Sure. But just for the scope of our class.
But it just seems to me that when I learned history, the Middle Ages in France and the French Revolution was considered enlightened.
Yes.
now they turn it upside down.
Correct, yeah,
It's not.
that's right. Well, Nazism. Yeah, Nazism is a rabid reaction against the French Revolution. And Chapoutot documents in his book how that 1789 is like, for in the Nazi worldview, is this like year zero of the world like being turned on its head, and that their mission is to restore it to its proper way. Okay, now in our world, in the context in which we live in, we look at the French Revolution as a great thing. You know, I mean, it's very much in, of course, the French Revolution, the American Revolution, and our nation that we have established on these principles is all of one piece. But Nazism is the opposite of this view. So, you know, it's reactionary against the French Revolution. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I think the Nazis see the French Revolution as the forerunner of the Russian Revolution, which was the Bolshevism. And
Yeah.
They sort of threw all the Jews in as Bolsheviks and Russians
Definitely.
being subunit.
definitely. Yeah, yeah. All right, I want to invite you to turn now to page 86. And here, and we're going to look at this section entitled Universalism and Its Contradictions. Alone in the world, unmixed, gathering from nature the laws it was to follow, the Nordic race had once known nothing of the perversion of human intelligence that would one day become universalism. When we read this, you'll see the way, I think he does a really nice job of painting this picture of, in this description of the Nordic man, whatever. It's almost like this, it's like an animal-like figure. Just at one with nature, that the Germanic, Nordic, you know, whatever terms they use, is this like figure that just emerges from nature and is fully bonded with nature. There is no separation between nature and Nordic man. So in like some early pristine time, my note there in the margin says Gan Eden like. Okay, like in the story of creation in the Torah. You know, God creates the human being, places them in the Garden of Eden. It's like this perfect paradise, and the human beings are part of this perfectly ordered world, and everything has its place, and Adam and Eve are unaware of any distinction between themselves and the rest of creation around them. It's only when they eat the forbidden fruit that they gain the awareness and see that I am distinct from what is around me. Okay, so the Nazis they hate Judaism. They hate everything that Judaism stands for, the Hebrew Bible, the teachings they hate Christianity because it's born from Judaism. Everything that dates to this idea of the human being as abstracted from the nature around itself is counter to the way they see the world. As was so often the case, it was the Jews who had promoted this idea in the guise of Christianity. As the SS Leitheft affirmed, the doctrine of the equality of all men that was preached among the nations by the churches and by the apostles of Bolshevism sought to supplant original racist thought and to lift the natural barriers that existed among peoples, barriers that followed the natural laws of life. Universalist Christian egalitarianism had played a decisive role in the emergence of the idea of equality. According to one NSDAP publication, it is the Jew Paul who must be considered as the father of all this. as he, in a very significant way, established the principles of the destruction of a worldview based on blood. Instead of an evaluation of peoples and bloods, his political church decided to consider only individuals. The church had spurned all of the natural evidence and assembled men of different races in, quote, a community of faith. And if one were to believe the priest's pastorals, a Negro baptized as a Catholic was closer to a young German Catholic girl than a non-Catholic German man, even if they shared the same blood. Now, this is totally accurate about Paul. I mean, it's a very, negative and bile-filled reading of Paul. But, one of the things that Paul says in, we didn't read it, it is a different section of his letters, but he said, I have to paraphrase it because I don't know the quote, but he says something to the effect of that there is no male or female, no Greek, no Roman in Christ Jesus. Okay, that faith in Jesus eliminates all difference, and that everyone who believes in Jesus is brother or sister in Christ. So Paul universalizes the message of the Hebrew Bible in a way that the Hebrew Bible does not, right? The Hebrew Bible is particularistic. God has a covenant with the Jewish people, right? With the people of Israel. But Paul's, I wonder, Dory, do you mind looking up the statement of Paul that's like no Jew, no Gentile, no male, no female, no Greek, no Roman in Christ Jesus, something like that. So here, what this statement that it was Paul who first came up with this idea of universalism, where there's no inherent difference between people. The only difference is whether they are brothers and sisters in faith or not. And then he's saying, and now look at this kind of perversion of the world. A black person who's a Catholic is considered the same as a German person who is a Catholic, even though their natural type is completely different. They are, as it were, of two different, species in Nazi think. Okay, Dory, do you happen to have the Paul quote?
Not handy.
Oh, okay. Well, if you find it, let me know.
Okay.
All right. So there is a hatred here, as you can see, for Christianity. All right, I want to turn your attention now to page 88. Do you go forward to page 88? Okay, so this is this from Fritz Lenz, some Nazi thinker. Just highlighted this, where he has this idea he calls gentilism.
I found the quote.
Oh, okay, Adam, can you read it for us?
There is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor is there male and female, but you are all one in Christ Jesus.
There you go. There is neither Jew nor Gentile, nor slave nor free, nor male nor female, but you are all one in Christ Jesus. That belief in Jesus obliterates all human difference. That's the universalist message of Paul. And the Nazis here are condemning Paul as the originator of this idea that all people are the same. And they're saying absolutely they are not the same. Okay, so gentilism. The gentilist system describes a vital order that places the biological community at the heart of law and of morality. Gentilism, from the Latin gens, people, was the classical moral system of the, quote, Chinese, who originally were a Nordic people. See, this is like originally were Nordic people, and, quote, and of the ancient Germanic tribes, as well as of the other Indo-Germanic peoples. Now, go down to the next highlight. It is the people as an organism that is our ethical end. Okay, now this is a really important statement to understanding the Nazi worldview. The people as an organism. What do you think? What does that mean? Bill, I'm sorry. Well, which people?
Well, you're saying it's an anathema to.
No. This is a Nazi idea. The people as an organism that is our ethical end. He's quoting from a Nazi thinker. The Germanic people is a single organism, which would mean that each individual German is part of the organism. Okay, an organism is like it's biologically, organically connected. Okay, and that anything from outside the organism would threaten to infect it, right? Like a virus. So this is a very biological worldview. Okay, so we need to see that before we read the stuff about Jews. Let's turn to, let's see. We don't need that. Oh, let's turn to page 91. Let's turn to page 91. Okay, now, this is he's quoting here from, towards the bottom, the indented part, he's quoting from somebody named Jörg Melis, some Nazi philosopher. All right, and he says, National Socialism does not demand that other peoples and other races see the world with the same eyes. Yes, it is convinced that other nations see the world differently, and consequently that other values and other principles are valid for them. National Socialism, therefore, does not profess to be a universal ideology, a doctrine to which all peoples of the world should submit. Magnanimous and in perfect coherence with racist thinking, Melis conceded that, quote, all peoples are different and they profess values that correspond to their races. Each people, and this is true of all of them, creates a universe of values, all its own. Alfred Rosenberg, he's a Nazi ideologist, repeatedly argued much the same thing in a series of newspaper articles devoted to the law and how it should be defined. Quote, the individualist and universalist ideas dominant until now are ceding to a way of thinking based in biology. We do not believe that a legal norm should be thought of based on the individual abstracted from his blood, nor do we believe that there are any so-called, quote, eternal laws or, quote, eternal ideas handed down from heaven and intended for all the peoples of the earth. Quite to the contrary, it is becoming clearer and clearer that legal cultures are born with a specific racial soul with which they perish or prevail. Melis warned, however, that the particularism he was proclaiming should not be mistaken for a synonym of relativism. This observation certainly does not lead us to insipid relativism. The relative is the enemy of all strong life. The National Socialist worldview is absolutely valid for each member of the German people. It is not only the best relative to others, but the only one that is right, and the only one that is possible for anyone who identifies with authentic Germanity. The fact of race imposed the Nazi worldview in an absolute way as the most fitting expression of the race on each member of the Volksgemeinschaft, the racial community, the ethnic community. Such a thesis made it possible to be as implacable at home as one was magnanimous abroad. Asking Ethiopians or Turks to be Nazis was sheer madness. In 1938, as the Third Reich was dismantling the Treaty of Versailles, Hans Frank proclaimed a kind of minimalist fraternity of particularisms, with an unambiguous refusal of any outside interference. Other peoples and races have laws that correspond with their individuality, just as the German people has its own lifestyle. It is precisely because we consider races and peoples as biological entities that we uphold each people's right to live in keeping with the form its life takes. Okay, so we see here almost this, this world that consists of these different biological forms. And each one is different from the other and has its own, operates according to its own, DNA, as it were. And it's a hierarchy. And the Germanic one is at the top. And that's how the world is supposed to be. Okay, so this is the general worldview. Now we're going to get to the Jews, and all of this will help us understand what the very disturbing stuff we'll read about Jews. Adam.
The implication is that you have these organisms that they apply to the Darwinian principles of survival of the fittest.
Correct. That's exactly right.
And that the most powerful organism will eventually prevail over the other.
Exactly right. Yeah. So Nazism is a survival of the fittest ideology. But he said this is related to Darwinism, that the strongest biological substances survive. That's exactly right. Nazism described itself as social Darwinist. That it's all of life is a struggle, a fight, a war between different biological organisms to survive and perpetuate itself. Which is why Ian Kershaw, a scholar, hopefully you listen to his interviews. He's very interesting. But he says in the part 2, I think, of that interview that I shared last week, that that in his estimation, as a historian, biographer of Hitler, it would never have been possible for Nazism to stabilize. In other words, like for the Nazis to win World War II and then just kind of go along as a regular place. That Nazism, by its very self-understanding, always had to be at war, because that's the essence of life, is constant war. So very disturbing, but it all makes sense. Yeah.
Got a hand up on Zoom.
Except Christianity, how did they?
No, they hate Christianity.
So, but most of the German people were Christian,
Yeah.
so how did they?
Well, I recommend this book or others about Christianity, but I mean, that's a kind of a political question in terms of how they co-opted the German Christian churches into essentially like a Nazi religion. They call it like German Christianity, where it was the Christian churches, but it really subordinated itself to the Nazi regime and so forth. But you see in what we read here, they hated Christianity because they see Christianity as just a vehicle for Jewish values, Jewish ideas to penetrate into the German body. Okay, there's a hand online.
Yes, Dorothy.
Okay, Dorothy, go ahead.
Thank you. So maybe I missed something in the readings, but so there's a divorce from any moral code. If it's Germanic, it's already up there, and you don't have to follow any established moral code.
Well, correct.
Huh.
Insofar, you need to read this book, but this is where you get the what they call the Führer principle. Okay, the Führer is Hitler. It means leader, and the idea behind the Führer principle is that the biological organism has like an aspect of it that directs the organism. And that the Führer, the leader, it is the manifestation of the will of the organism. So in German law, and this is what we're going to read, it doesn't operate, and Nazi law doesn't operate according to like a law code, because the will of the Führer is the law. Because he manifests the natural life. Okay, so it's gross. I mean, it's crazy, but this is the.
So
All
that,
right, so I want
that
to.
everyone who
I'm sorry,
follows
I
the
wanna
Führer,
read-
okay,
I want to read, and we'll take more questions in a minute,
Okay.
but I want to read this material. Let's turn to the first page, 72 in the packet. Okay, so this section, this segues into what you just asked about, Dorothy, about law. The Jews, people of the law. It's the same packet, it's just the first page of the packet. Okay, page 72. In the beginning was the law, the direct expression of a natural morality that obeyed the laws of life. The German people were now slave to a multitude of abstract laws and had forgotten the concrete law governing its life. Much ink has been spilled over Nazi anti-intellectualism. After all, Hitler did admit his preference to boxing over grammar lessons in Mein Kampf. Eternal fascism? Of course. At the same time, however, one must look deeper than the very real hatred of intellectuals and push past the just as real inferiority complexes of parvenus and the way they affected their attitudes toward the academic elite. What was described earlier, a return to nature with the goal of directly and instinctively apprehending it, goes much further than that. And the program that lay behind it is far more than just a simple, banal form of fascist anti-intellectualism. Very classically, at a conference of jurists, Hans Frank, he's a Nazi legal scholar, declared, quote, Jewish domination sought to imprison the clergy in their libraries and cut them off from the people. It was even affirmed that being foreign to the race and to the people was a criterion of intellectual excellence. Professors, National Socialism is asking you for a science that comes from the people and serves the people. The people here were understood as a racial reality and a biological imperative. The enemies of this people were designated over the course of this conference, which was devoted to, quote, the Jewry in the German legal sciences. Quote, the time for daydreaming, meditation, and reverie, the time for formalist debates over abstraction, and for excessive systematization, for verbose ratiocination, is well and truly over. Jews were beings of abstraction, for they hated what was real. Okay, so now this is the role of Jews in this whole schematic. Everything that we read before was about this, biological, rooted, inextricable from nature kind of reality that is the natural order of things with a hierarchy, a food chain, and whatever. But Jews are not part of that system. Jews are rooted nowhere. They have no natural home. They are not tied to nature. They are not of nature. They are something else. An alien kind of anti-force. Okay, is what he's describing. Or what's being described here. They were beings of abstraction, for they hated what was real. This hatred had led them to invent artifice, to take refuge in what did not exist, in phantasmagoria. I looked at that word. And he's just like, all kinds of fanciful things. confabulated in their poor sick heads. It was the Jews who had written the laws. They were the quote people of the law because they were incapable of living and thinking the law, the natural law that is, which was the pure expression of the natural world they were defying. The Jews knew they were inferior and incomplete. They hated nature and the world, as well as nature's greatest achievements, chief among these the Nordic race. Okay. Lori.
I think this is beautiful and ironic because I think what most of us love about being Jewish is that we have this moral code. We see adultery and we say don't be adulterous. We see incest, we see murder, we see natural things.
Correct.
And we say it stinks. Let's get rid of the natural world. We have this fantasy, we're idealistic, we're gonna make things better, and the
Yeah.
Nazis hate that about it.
Exactly. Yeah. The law, I mean, the law, that's central to Judaism. Torah and Talmud and, codes, reams and reams of books, all, of law, structure, our sages and thinkers, philosophers in Judaism talk about the law, the halakha, as the DNA of the universe, that is the expression of the divine will. But of course, it's abstract. You can't see it. And how much of, so much of the Jewish way, the Jewish ethos is, engage in the study of texts and discussion of ideas and figuring out, the discourse in the Talmud. Rabbi Akiva says this, but Rava raises the difficulty about what Rabbi Akiva says, and what about in this case, and what about in that case? And this is Judaism. And this is exactly what the Nazis are despising. Okay, what they're despising is it's all like made up, unreal, nothing to do with nature, with natural life. It's all like this alienated, weird world. Mumbo jumbo that the Jews have constructed. And they have, and they say, like, they have convinced through Christianity, through Marxism, through these various isms, these are all vehicles that the Jews have used to inject this infection into the Germanic body. Okay, this is how they're seeing it. Okay, so it overturns, it poisons the natural world. Adam.
Dorothy has her hand up.
Okay, let's go to Adam first, and we'll go back to Dorothy.
The main principle of Judaism is love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah.
That's completely antithetical, antithesis of saying dominate your neighbor because it's not like yourself.
Exactly. Judaism is the opposite of Nazism. That's the point. That's the point that the Nazis are making too. That Judaism is the absolute opposite of our worldview. Okay, Dorothy, go ahead.
Thank you. What this does for all of us who are reading it is it makes it so clear that each person who followed this path had personal responsibility for their actions. This is not just following orders. This is they had to be. Each one is embracing this and had to be guilty of willingly assuming the personal responsibility of, I believe I'm better than you. I believe that I am of a race that has absolute powers greater than yours. It's so turning ethics and morality upside down that,
Yes.
and it can't just be that people said, "Oh, I didn't really know." You knew, you had to know.
Well, so yes. Now Ian Kirsch. I just started reading another one of his books, where he's talking about Hitler's kind of sources of power. Like, why did people follow Hitler? How did he consolidate his power and so forth? And he talks about like there are concentric circles in terms of how all this radiates outward. You know, like there's the fanatics, the Nazis, the ideologues and all that who understood the stuff, and then there's further out in terms of people that they didn't understand these things, but they, you know, they had nationalist fervor or whatever, and they go, you know, and they contribute to what he calls the charismatic cult of the Führer. You know, so it's I think it's a little more complicated than just saying like every rank and file ordinary German understood all of this ideology. They probably didn't. But nevertheless, this is that we know that the Nazis were very aggressive about indoctrination, you know, through education and other media and other means about this, you know, about Nazi ideology. So yes, this is the construction of a world in which the Germanic people are at the top of the natural chain. All right, so let's keep going. 73. Unable to live happily with nature and its laws, they had created and formulated artificial laws that were a negation of the natural world. This is the Nazi characterization of Jews. Moreover, these mixed and unstable beings had bound themselves with the constraining and inanimate written word, for they, anarchic, nervous, and sickly, mistrusted life, which offered them neither essence nor constancy. Incapable of governing themselves, the Jews had taken refuge in a set of words that was their only touchstone and source of stability. Their geographic wanderings, combined with their psychological instability, truly left them with no respite and no bearings. As Carl Schmitt put it, quote, there are peoples that without a territory, without a state, and without a church exist only through, quote, law. To them, normativist thought is the only reasonable legal approach. As a miscegenated people, it's like a jumble, a mixture. Remember, like the Germanic, they're conceiving peoples as like these biological entities that are, you know, and the Germanic entity is pure. It's, you know, the blood is pure within the organism. But they say that the Jews, because Jews aren't rooted anywhere, they've wandered the world and mixed up with all these different races and everything. So they're miscegenated. So as a miscegenated people, the Jews were furthermore intellectually and psychologically schizophrenic because they were substantively mixed. According to raciologists, the Jews were, as we have seen, a non-race, Unrasse, or a counter-race, Gegenrasse. This is what Prager and Telushkin are talking about. It's not strictly that the Nazis are racist and they see that the Jews are an inferior race. That is true, but the Jews are unique compared to all other races in that, and for them, the Jews are a non-race or an anti-race. Okay. So I guess maybe in the analogy of like the biology, it's like the Jews are a malignant virus, like a cancer, literally, that seeks to destroy the organism. Okay. Jews were always described as a coagulated jumble of different racial elements, never whole, never complete. Quote, the Jew is a bastard, taught the SS Department of Racial Expertise. An aggregate, quote, of the Oriental, the Asian, of Asia Minor, the Hamitic, the Negro. This meant that diverse and contradictory beings coexisted and warred within them. They could not trust their own instincts because they did not have any. Instinct, after all, was the direct expression of a racial identity not afflicted by contradictions or problems. A racially mixed being, then, was by nature contradictory and even schizophrenic. Quote, natural harmony is upset by the crossing of races, which produces imbalance. This imbalance was hematic, endocrinal, and therefore psychological. Within human groups and countries, this gave rise to revolutionary entities and countries whose, quote, development is hampered by riots, revolutions, and power struggles. At the individual level, miscegenation produced beings whose blood and psyches bore the same taint. Racial bastards suffered from psychologies that were, quote, divided and torn apart because, quote, two beings are at war within them, at the very least. Quote, another sad story of the betrayal of the white race was that of the Rhineland bastards, the result of France's criminal policy of stationing African troops in Germany, and the irresponsibility of certain German women who had conceived children with these Negroes. Okay, next paragraph. The Jew was the ultimate mixed being and had to follow a law, a code, a written norm. No instinct would ever dictate this law to him. He had to refer to a text, which explained the cultural and psychological importance to the Jewish people of rabbis and exegetes, of education and reading, and of the written word. The Jews were a people of the yeshiva and of the Torah, all because they were an unsettled, troubled and troubling people. Beyond the law, the Jews had generated the hypertrophy of the law and of legalism, that was formalism. The two bête noirs of the, quote, renewers of German law, positivism and formalism, were thus Jewish creations. All right, so let's talk about this, because the law, so this goes to Dorothy's question about law code. Is there no moral code? Is there no code? What do you see happening here? Len?
You see all these like jurists who study law, like turning, like hating the thing that obsessed them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's a weird characterological thing. It's like what they're doing is they're saying basically law itself is what you need if you're so out of balance with nature, if you're so at war with yourself that if you don't put in normatizing standards, then you will be lost to your degeneracy.
Yeah.
Which I've always found to be the case. But I mean, it's crazy to watch it. It's crazy to doing it.
Right, so they're overturning the whole concept of law as we understand it. They're saying that law, as the Western world knows it, is a Jewish creation based on the things that Len described, miscegenation out of a lack of balance with nature and with self and race and all of these things. And that law is, all of law as we know it is just mumbo jumbo. And what law really is it's embedded in the cosmos and it's natural, it's instinctual. Okay, this underlies then the Führer principle, which is to say that in the Nazi worldview, Hitler was the German who was best in touch with this natural law embedded in the world. So his word was the expression of law. There is no books, there's no code, there's no, when they talk about formalism, like meaning like there's structures to law that, like, you know, formalism is a doctrine of law that essentially says like law is mechanical. That, you know, such and such happens, this is the law that applies to it, this is the category of how to make sense of it, you apply the law, you get an outcome. Nazism is opposed to all of that because they say law is fluid and ever-changing like life itself, and law is articulated by the leader, by the Führer. Okay, David.
How does this seems to be in direct conflict with what the Nazis do once they come to power and start creating law.
Yeah.
That is directly in contrast to this. They create the Nuremberg laws. They defined who a Jew is, who a Jew is not.
Yeah, they do.
They define, how you can marry, how, how people can have relations, etc.
Correct, yeah. Yeah, but read more about law because they, there's interesting articles in legal theory about Nazi law because Nazi law, not only in terms of its out, objectively morally pernicious nature is a problematic, but in terms of theories of law, like what makes law, there's a philosopher named Lon Fuller who talks about what he calls the internal morality of the law. One of the features in the internal morality of law that makes law is predictability. Okay, that in order for law to be law, if you're governed by it, you have to know what the law is, right? So otherwise, it's not law. Well, Nazi law, there's an interesting article, Lon Fuller has an article about Nazi law and how it violates the principles of predictability because there's all kinds of retroactive law, there's stuff, they put in things into place that nobody knows what's going on because it's totally mass chaos. It's just whatever occurs to Hitler, and he expresses it, it is the law. The writing of it down is simply transcribing the will of the Führer. It's not, there's no formalistic process of how law becomes law. Okay, so while you're right, there are laws written down, it's a different system. It's not a system. Just suspend stuff, whatever it is law. If he says it. Okay, so it's not a system of law, even though they do write down laws. All right, we're coming to the end, but I want to see a couple of things. Just at the bottom of the next paragraph, the underlined highlighted part, it says, the Jew by this definition had no form. Jews were chaotic because of the mixing that characterized their substance. This formlessness had led the Jews to seek refuge in formalism. Since their ontology was labial and uncertain, they found a reassurance and structure in and through the rigidity of unquestioned and imperative norms. The Jews were the people of the law because they needed its normative backbone to live. This law did not lead them to construct the cosmos, however. Instead, it commanded them to act in keeping with its nature, which was to sow chaos and devastation. Formless, deformed, the Jew deformed and destroyed, unlike the Aryan, who informed and conformed. Seen in this light, the need to rid German legal life of all Jewish elements was understandable. The Jewish mind had to be hunted down, and practitioners of Judaism mercilessly expelled. Now down in the next highlighted part, the law, that is nature's original law, was Germanic and a living thing, whereas laws, as in corpuses of individual laws, were rabbinic ooze, a dead and deadly matter. This conception of the relationship between justice and the law allowed Himmler to appropriate the notion of law with complete sincerity while heaping scorn on individual laws. He was by no means being cynical when he wrote of the German police and their activities. We, the National Socialists, it seems strange to be saying this here before the Academy für Deutsche Recht, German Academy of Law, but all will soon be clear to you. We have gone to work not without respect for the law, for we carry it within us, but without respect for laws. I decided immediately that if a paragraph in a law caused us to deviate from our path, I would ignore it entirely. And that in order to accomplish my work in the service of the Führer and the people, I would do what my conscience and good common sense commanded me to do. There were people who, in the months and years during which the life and death of the German people were at stake, bemoaned this, quote, violation of the laws. This mattered not one whit to me. Abroad, naturally, there was talk of a lawless police state. Following the French Revolution, civil law progressively insinuated itself into every state, which had the effect of detaching the legal concept of citizenship. Did I turn to the right place? Sorry, I skipped a page. Wait a minute. Of a lawless police state, 76. Okay. There was talk of lawlessness because what we were doing did not correspond to what they understood by the word law. But in truth, with our work, we were laying the foundations of a new law, the German people's right to life. In other words, the most basic and ancient of laws, forgotten for centuries. We have limited ourselves, quite simply, to restoring the most ancient law of our people. This is what the police are doing. Himmler asked the jurists he was addressing in this speech to do the work necessary to simplify German law so that it would be congruent with the laws of nature and the laws of the race, as had once been the case long ago. The basic concepts of the law must correspond with the blood and the spirit produced by the body of our race. If you can formulate that law and sum it up in a corpus of maxims, not in paragraphs, but in aphorisms brimming with wisdom and intelligence, understandable to the simplest of men with no legal training, you will have accomplished a tremendous task. Okay, so that's what I wanted to teach you about Nazism. But now, having read this, what are your takeaways in terms of how this culminates in the Holocaust?
Dr. Karen had her hand up.
Okay, Karen?
Well, it all kind of circles back that I think somewhere he says something about the ideology will lead to deed, and the aim of the deed is to annihilate this tuberculosis on the maggot on the race.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's quite clear through this worldview they've constructed. I think, Dorothy, I think you had wanted to say something. I didn't circle back. Go ahead.
You're muted. Dorothy, you're muted.
Thank you. It just reaffirms my feeling that each person has willingly or maybe been swept away with the crowd, but accepted the idea that doing reprehensible things in the name of proving that your race is superior to everybody else's is still the responsibility of the individual. I have no second thoughts now about, well, how many people really knew what was going on. I honestly believe in my heart reading this was known and this was accepted. And now when I see all those movies or whatever with everybody's hand going up to the Fuhrer, it's not just a salute. It is an acceptance of whatever you say, sir, is good. And that just is more horrific because we're living in times that have a bit of that coming up now. And you see how quickly it can wash over a whole population. Very scary.
Thank you.
Don't jump off a bridge.
Don't jump off the bridge. Leslie. No, Len, sorry. Looked like Leslie's hand coming up from behind. All right, go ahead.
I mean, it just reinforces, and I feel this a lot now. I mean, when you reached that we rely on law. We rely on its predictability, and we rely on its being an ultimate decider of things. When an entire legal philosophy is based on making the law maximally flexible so that it suits And in fact, it completely affirms what an erratic head of state wants, then there is no law.
Right.
Because there's no place to appeal, and there's no ultimate anything in civil society other than law or violence,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So it's just sort of terrifying to see it here, because of course they instate the Nuremberg laws, because they have the power to do that. They have the power of the state behind the laws, so they can make the laws do what they want.
Yeah.
And of course you can't appeal beyond that, because they have the power to change the laws as they see fit.
Right.
Yeah, feels familiar.
Yes. Yeah. So this goes then back to the. I just want to tie it up with referring back to the Prager and Chelushkin when they talk about the unique role of the Jews in Nazi ideology that extends beyond just being a secondary race or an inferior race, but the concept of Jews as the unrace or the anti-race, and really expressed through law that they see that the Jews gave law, this fake thing called law, to the world, which has poisoned the German, organic body and the whole, all of Western culture. And what Prager and Chelushkin say is that the Nazis hate Jews because of what Judaism is. And they didn't scapegoat the Jews in order to get power. They sought power in order to destroy the Jews. I think is right. When you read this, I think it's clear that it's right. And they know, the Prager and Chelushkin know that Hitler's last will and testament to the German people, when he wrote in the bunker right before he committed suicide, he instructed the German people to scrupulously observe the laws of race and blood and to destroy Jewry. That he cared about that more than anything else. So, and I hope that you can see, because I think the line that we have traced over this time hopefully is, makes it evident that this is a uniquely evil and extreme form of anti-Semitism, much more so than any of the others that we've seen. And yet, Nazism would not have been possible had it not been for what came before. Okay. So next week, we're going to have the guest speaker from the ADL talking about the anti-Semitic lineage of anti-Zionism, which brings us, of course, into the modern day. Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening. Thank you, Dory. Good night, everyone.